Manchester United versus Arsenal was a game defined by fine margins. Despite United controlling over 60% of the possession, registering 14 shots inside the penalty area and consistently exploiting the wide zones, Arsenal held firm and secured a 1-0 victory. What stood out tactically was United's improved structure in build-up, their wing overloads pinning Arsenal's fullbacks, and the impact of returning players like Luke Shaw and Mason Mount. On the other hand, Arsenal's midfield triangle of Zubimendi, Rice and Ødegaard struggled to dictate rhythm, while careless, technical errors prevented them from sustaining control. In this analysis, we'll break down how United's pressing and wide rotations created problems, why Arsenal looked vulnerable in their build-up, and how a single, decisive, set-piece moment ultimately separated the two sides. United's game plan under Ruben Amorim was clear from the first whistle: exploit the wide channels and isolate Arsenal's full-backs. The system encouraged wing-backs to push high and combine with inside forwards, creating repeated 2 versus 1 overloads against Ben White and Calafiori. This forced Arsenal's defensive line into constant stretching, either dragging centre-backs wider than they'd like or leaving space in central zones. By doubling up in these wide areas, United weren't just aiming to deliver crosses, but also to drag Arsenal's compact shape apart. When the ball was circulated quickly from one flank to the other, Arsenal often struggled to shuffle across in time, and this produced gaps for late runners like Fernandes or Cunha to exploit at the edge of the box. Out of their own build-up, Amorim's tweaks also stood out. Instead of inverting a centre-back into midfield, a common solution against Arsenal's high press, United dropped their midfielders closer to the defensive line during goal kicks. This small adjustment allowed them to bypass Arsenal's first wave of pressure with cleaner progression. Casemiro and Fernandes acted as short outlets, while Fernandes positioned himself higher to link the second phase, meaning United could more comfortably play through and then accelerate forward. Once the ball entered midfield, the strategy was direct and vertical. Cunha and Mbeumo constantly looked to attack the space behind Arsenal's defensive line, stretching them both horizontally and vertically. Sesko's movement pinned Gabriel and Saliba, giving United clear targets for early balls forward. In short, United's wide overloads, clever build-up tweaks, and direct transitional play made them look the more dynamic side for large periods. Their inability to convert those chances was the only missing ingredient from what could have been a statement performance. Arsenal, by contrast, leaned on their familiar 4-3-3 structure, but the execution fell well short of the control we've come to associate with Arteta's side. The midfield triangle of Zubimendi, Rice and Ødegaard was supposed to provide a balance of security, dynamism and creativity, yet, in practice, it rarely clicked. Zubimendi sat deepest, tasked with shielding the defence and offering a pivot point in possession, while Rice roamed to cover space and carry the ball forward. Ødegaard, as always, was meant to dictate tempo and connect the front three. The problem was that Arsenal consistently fell short in the details. Technical errors in simple passing sequences, hesitation in tight spaces, and poor decision-making under pressure prevented them from establishing long spells of possession. United's mid-block proved particularly effective here. Amorim's men narrowed the central channels, forcing Arsenal to circulate wide, then doubling up aggressively on the fullbacks. This left little room between the lines for Ødegaard to influence play, and meant that Rice and Zubimendi often looked disconnected from the forward line. Arteta still tried to shift his team into the familiar 3-2-5 attacking structure in settled possession, with Calafiori or White stepping into midfield alongside Zubimendi. In theory, this should have stretched United and created overloads in the half spaces. In practice, however, United's compactness meant Arsenal were met with little penetration. Their fullbacks were pressed high, the wingers rarely found clean isolation, and Gyökeres's debut was marked more by passive pressing than by threatening movements in behind. Among the midfielders, Ødegaard stood out as the only player consistently willing to take responsibility, demanding the ball, attempting progressive passes and trying to carry Arsenal up the pitch. But even he struggled to be decisive in the final third, with his influence often limited to recycling possession rather than breaking lines. Rice, unusually subdued, failed to impose his athleticism, while Saka was forced deeper and wider than usual, cutting him off from dangerous central areas. As a result, Arsenal's attack became reactive rather than proactive. Instead of dominating through structured possession, they played what can best be described as 50-50 football, trading punches with United, allowing transitions to flow both ways and relying on defensive resilience rather than asserting their own rhythm. For long stretches, the Gunners looked mentally hesitant, almost content to sit behind the ball after taking the lead instead of reclaiming control through sharp passing. Their one breakthrough, the decisive goal, came not from open play but from a set piece. This underlined the reality of their performance. Arsenal edged ahead not by dismantling United's structure but by taking advantage of fine margins. In truth, it was United who carried the greater threat in open play while Arsenal held on thanks to defensive commitment and a touch of fortune. In short, Arteta's men never truly broke United down. They survived, they resisted, and they took their chance when it came, but their performance lacked the dominance and bravery that has defined their best displays.